When John asked if I would talk about this, I had some serious reservations. I totally believe in making plans, but if you've heard me speak from this podium before, you know I've made some bad ones. I made plans that I didn't really deserve to have the result of. I've taken some wrong turns. I've kissed a few frogs. I feel like before I understood treatment and science of mind, I don't know that I ever would have had the kind of success that I currently have, that I'm in the process that I'm currently in. And what changed it for me was something that I learned from Dr. Walker early on. He used to say, treat and move your feet. Treat and move your feet. Now, I think about that. So many times I was moving my feet without the treatment, but what I've realized is that sequence is really important. First, you treat, establish the consciousness of, make sure that you love it, that you invest in it, that you deserve it, and then you move your feet. Now, treatment in my world takes two forms. One I call the short form, where I'm in the middle of a testosterone-fueled argument with somebody, muttering under my breath, preparing for some confrontation, or if I'm about to make a phone call to ask for a job or to buy something or turn somebody down or express a criticism, that short form treatment that precedes that is really simple. It really is knowing that I'm enough, knowing that my best and highest good is about to come out of my mouth and return to me bigger and better than I could have imagined. There's another form that I call the long form. And the long form for me it's very specific. In fact, it's as much for maintenance as it is for creativity. Sometimes you just treat to keep going what you've already created. But sometimes you're really treating to create something. And in that long form creative treatment, I think the most important thing for me is it's specific, it's vivid, you really own it, you really picture it. And something else that I learned from Dr. Walker, there's no Irving in that treatment. He used to say, there's no Irving in your treatment. Irving does not belong in your treatment. You're treating your own consciousness. It cannot include anybody else's. It is not dependent upon anybody else's. So in my long-form treatments, I make sure that I leave that out. I don't hang it on anything that is anybody else's. Now, in my 19 or so years as an architectural firm, 2.5 years ago, I had this kind of wild idea that I would create this furnishings company that I call Auteur Furnishings, which is a word that means kind of visionary. And I've got a team of colleagues at my office who, I've got to say, we're not into it. But I'm about to commit a lot of resources, time, money, staff time, advertising, website, all of that stuff, to this brainchild that I've got that I'm pretty sure is going to really give me my creative expression. And so one of the first things I did was to write this pro forma. Now, you can be on the internet and you can see all kinds of outlines for a pro forma. I'm going to give you just a brief outline of what mine was, knowing that it was about this company. You can maybe take something away from that for some idea that you might want to manifest. So the one that I wrote has a 1 year, a 2 year, and a 5 year fruition. So I had to write it 3 times, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. It has to assume that all the functions that happen start on day one. So you're entirely prepared on day one of that new venture. It's not a slip into it. It's having everything thought out. Because a lot of these pro formas are used to go to a venture capitalist and say, I have a new idea. I want you to fund it. I want you to start my new idea from the ground up. But obviously you can't just walk in with something that isn't reasoned. So in that 1 year, 2 year, 5 year plan, you have to think about the costs that will begin the job, begin the product, because they change over time. You have to think of delays and things that might slow you down or might restrict your success. You've got to use a high-low mechanism, so you try to figure out what's the worst that would happen, what's the best that could happen. So you try to put your expectations in that range. You've got to have a really clear goal. Who, what, when, where, why. All of those things have to be really thought out, and they're mostly personal. It's not something you can get out of a spreadsheet that somebody else wrote. It's really about who you want to do what, when, and how. I think the why is probably the most important part of that pro forma, and we almost always leave that out of our plans. Why? Why do I want to do that? Why do I want to go to that effort? Why do I want those results? If you really think through the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why, then you can get to the how. Now, the how has got to be also very specific. There are steps to design your venture. In my case, I had to figure out, first of all, how I was going to draw and design the prototypes for the lighting and the furniture. I had to figure out how I would make the prototypes, who would make them, where I'd get the money for that, how I would test them, how I would refine them. I had to figure out who my market was. To whom would I be selling these? Or would I even be selling them at all? Would I be licensing these? I had to think about how they would be packaged and labeled and shipped. I had to think about who would do the administration of this, who takes the call, who answers the email, how does that work administratively? Where do I find that person? I had to think about what the projected revenues might be. So the incoming cash, the breakdown compared with my competitors, the breakdown compared to anything that I've done similar in my own experience. So I had made and sold furniture and lighting before, so knowing how that worked, what it cost, how I managed to sell it was important, but also looking around to find out how other people did it, how other companies did it, was a really necessary part of the research. I had to project my operating expenses. For example, rent and utilities, all sort of the fixed costs. And then testing and packaging and labeling and advertising and staff and website and insurance and inventory cost and financing, interest on loans, all of those variable costs had to be estimated, again, in the 1 year, the 2 year, and the 5 year plan. After you do all of that, you can estimate your profits. What you think you'll make as profit once you've taken your revenue and your expenses. And then, of course, what tax do you have to pay on that? And what's really left over? That specific pro forma I wrote 3 times for my 1 year, my 2 year, and my 5 year plan for Auteur Furnishings. And then I gave my designs out to have the prototypes made. Then I tested and changed and revised the prototypes. And then I did the marketing and all the other parts that gave that business legs. But the most important part of all of that pro forma was what happened before it, the treatment. And so even now, every day, when I'm tackling the business of that secondary company that I created, I still have to give the treatment. I have to deserve it. I have to know why I want it. I have to check in. Maybe I'm changing. Maybe I don't want it as much, or maybe I want it to be different. But the treatment and the establishment of the consciousness of it, the free and easy expression of it that makes some sense, fuels the perspective that I view when I reread the pro forma. It fuels how I talk with people when I'm on the phone with them about the product. It fuels how I deal with my team and how we talk about it among ourselves and how we change or accelerate or grow our plans for expansion. It's all based on that consciousness. So the risk of making plans that specific without developing the consciousness first is a big one. I've done it many times, and it has failed every time that I haven't developed the consciousness first. But something else Dr. Walker said to me, I think about every day when I'm beginning this work. He said, "You are enough. Always have been, always will be." And so every time I have one of these big ideas and I start to make one of these big plans, I start with that. I'm enough. I always have been, I always will be. And that gives the rest of all this think through and planning an engine and an energy that it wouldn't have without it. Thanks.